Welcome to another edition of Chatting with Ingram. Now, today is going to be different. We're going to be talking drones and autonomous systems and other things with Rob Balloch, who is the Senior Vice President for Mars. But rather than me describe who Mars are and who Rob is, Rob, good to see you. Can you tell those who are listening today who you are and who Mars is?
Good morning, Philip. Rob Balloch, Vice President of Mars. My background and how I got to here is I started off life as a 16-year-old apprentice, or a tiffy, as people used to refer to as, but back in the good old days of HMS Fishguard, and did my professional training in the Royal Navy, ultimately ending up bobbing around in the North Atlantic on the back of a Type 42 with a Lynx helicopter with a speciality in weapons and avionics. I came out of the Navy and spent some time in the big tier ones, British Aerospace, on the Kinetic, but also spending a lot of time with the smaller companies. My first small-time employer was TSS, that ultimately became part of Oscar Thornycroft, with the Sonodyne Group for many years, and we'll talk about underwater autonomous systems later. And then latterly, my involvement with Mars, who I became involved as part of a European Union Framework 7 research program some 12 years ago. And it was a bit like the Remington advert. We were so impressed by Mars as the company that was the project manager for the group. We invested as Sonodyne at that point. And then latterly, when oil and gas was on a big high, Fluor Systems from America made us an offer we couldn't refuse, and I transferred as part of the corporate buy from Fluor, and Mars was part of the Fluor empire for a few years. But then about 5 years ago, we saw opportunity that the Americans didn't quite agree with, and we made the offer to do a management buyout, which to our surprise, Fluor agreed. And we've been a private company owned by the 5 shareholders ever since. Mainly on the focusing on a very niche market of mega yachts and very specific VVIP protection for some critical infrastructure, providing the perimeter security for either a maritime asset or a coastal based asset, integrating radars and cameras into our NIDAR C2 software, which evolved from this Framework 7 research programs that I mentioned earlier. And our big growth spurt came when those same clients came to us and said, look, we like your software and you're providing this for us. We really want you to do this for us, which at that time was counter-drone, because drones were becoming, air drones were becoming the new threat as opposed to surface drones and underwater drones or divers. And we had a couple of specific clients who came to us with, they basically said, we like this radar and we like this camera. We don't know what to do about the jammer and we don't know what to do about this. Can you help? And can you integrate all of these into your NIDAR command and control software, which was already in operation? And of course, we said, why not? It seemed like too good an opportunity. And, under the radar, if you'll pardon the pun, Mars has gradually become, over the last 18 months, probably in terms of revenue and volume, probably the biggest provider of counter-drone systems in the world that people have never heard of, which is the interesting bit.
Well, it's fascinating. There's so much I could unpack there. The Navy TIFI system is an absolutely brilliant training ground, and an old schoolmate came up through that. But the drone threat, and it's interesting you talked to that. We saw how the impact of a couple of small drones on Gatwick Airport a few years ago on the run up to Christmas had. But more recently, we're seeing the drone threat coming into Saudi Arabia from the Houthi rebels and the attacks that are happening across Saudi. Do you think that the tactics that we're seeing in the Middle East, where people are carrying out more semi-autonomous attacks, are likely to be exported elsewhere?
I think without a doubt, it comes back to and again, we're both talking from a military background here. If the other potential aggressors see the success that relatively low-cost drones are having on the impact in other areas, such as Saudi Arabia at the moment, they will copy it. It will be exported, and you don't necessarily need to have a large wingspan Casev 2 type drone to achieve some of those things. You can still carry a reasonable amount of weight on some of the mid-sized DJI type drones. And I'm genuinely surprised that we still haven't seen, we saw what happened in Gatwick. We haven't had in the West, the the DJI carrying some sort of weaponized device or threat into a stadium or something else. We know the DJIs are being modified and used in the battlefield and on the ground.
Certainly, I've seen sort of so-called Islamic State and Al Qaeda training videos where they've used modified drones relatively successfully in Iraq and Syria, or whenever that was there. But we saw in was it Azerbaijan, the war there, the impact that drones have had on armored vehicles,
and it's caused a huge rethink in just a matter of days. The amount of armor, if you like, that was taken out of the equation by a relatively small, inexpensive fleet of drones.
But the threat also must exist to critical national infrastructure.
It does very much, and again, we have to, what we try to do is to separate out the two threats from the, let's call it a false positive by people just getting too close with their, with their toys, the DJIs, the parrots, and that sort of thing. That's one part of it. To at the other end of the extreme is the, let's call it state-sponsored type drone activity with very large fixed-wing drones that can cover very long distances and carry very large payloads. And from that, from those two ends, and somewhere it's starting to converge in the middle, we're seeing mid-sized drones with small payload capability, and becoming the new threat. And the problem that brings to the potential end users for the type of equipment we look at is, what do you deploy and what are you trying to protect against? Because in some of the places, it's a combination of, they want to know what's going on around them. And to their extent, they're trying to watch for this asymmetric threat, state-sponsored, coming from hundreds of miles away, across the border. And the approach that we've tried to take, and we've been aware, and if you look at some of the, the recent industry reports, of which there are many looking at counter-drone, there are something like 500 companies around the world all saying, hey, we can do this. We can put a rifle in the air and we can jam a DJI, or to the other extent where, Patriot batteries are being used to take out long-range drones. The approach we've tried to take is, we don't manufacture the radar, the camera. We specialize in the integration. Is we try to look at identifying what the current best of breed, and that best of breed is constantly evolving and changing, and creating a modular type system architecture that the only limitation is the size of the budget that the client has, and and what the potential threat is. We can create a modular architecture that protects out to 500 meters, a stadium, a power station, or a piece of a government asset, for want of a better description, all the way to complete on the border protection and large scale infrastructure. Such as military.
The target sets that you're looking for are hugely different. From the small nano drones, exactly, that can provide a level of threat right up through to ones that can only be controlled by some form of state organization. Which do you consider the biggest threat, or are there equal threats? And are current air defense systems that are around critical national infrastructure, around military capabilities, sufficient to cover that sort of breadth? I think a Patriot missile to counter a DJI drone is a little bit of overkill.
Exactly, and and again, to answer that question in a couple of different ways, there are some countries that have some incredibly good and fully integrated air defense capability, but the threat they were designed for is not the threats that they're facing today. And so, as you say, we've got overkill now, where we're using something that was targeted at much larger threats now being used against small threats, and you can't afford to keep throwing up millions of dollars of countermeasure every time against something that maybe cost a few $1,000s that's coming against you. We're seeing the approach in terms of trying to come into air defense. There will always be a place for the long-range air defense, and let's call that the legacy platforms. Mm-hmm. But what we're trying to do now is to gap fill for these new emerging threats. The smaller CASIF type drones coming into the larger quadcopter type drones, all the way down to the micro drones. And essentially what you end up with now is one size doesn't fit all. I can't deploy a single radar system, for example, and say that radar system will pick up a DJI and it will pick up a CASIF at the other end. They're focused on different things. And if I use an example on some of the systems that we're deploying now, and they've got multiple radars, we have different radars configured looking for different targets, but they're all co-located and set up in such a way that they don't interfere with each other, but they're all supporting each other, but they're also looking for different types of targets. Some, low and slow, and some high and fast. Some for the shorter range, some from the longer range. And with some of the new radar capability about to come out that we're seeing towards potentially the end of this year and Q1 next year, we can extend that counter drone capability out to 50 kilometers plus quite easily, which is what our client base is looking for. And at that point, beyond 50 kilometers is where we would integrate into the legacy platforms of the air defense systems, where it's important that we enable the capability for the end user to both have a standalone counter-drone capability, but also the ability to hand information back across to the legacy systems and to take some of that information into our systems to help us better identify some of those longer range targets. And this is where we see the big change going around. It's not about just a standalone drone buster or something on the top of a 4x4. These have to be totally layered, integrated systems, and they have to be all talking to each other. And that little sweet spot that Mars seems to have hit in the market is our NIDAR, our brand name for our command and control software, is doing a great job of integrating those new best-of-breed sensors together, but also allowing the integration to the legacy platforms.
What you just described there, and I've done a bit of radar stuff at university in my basic degree and master's degree. You've described a level of sophistication in a very simple way that belies the real challenges that there are.
And I can tell you it's very challenging.
Exactly, especially with the target sets. How much do you rely on the development of other modern technologies like AI to support what it is that you're doing? And whenever you're getting into the higher level procurement side of things, it's always difficult for governments to keep up with the current technology. Are you finding that those that are involved in the wider defence and security procurement have got the ability to keep up with what's needed to counter this rapidly evolving threat platform?
Some governments are better than others, shall we say? And I'm not pointing fingers at my own.
No names, no pact rules.
But I'll try to give an example here. Here's a good example. Mars has just completed site acceptance test of our fully integrated multi-layer counter-drone systems with countermeasures that from contract signature to site acceptance took less than 16 months. And I know some governments would spend that long just writing the white paper. So there are some people who understand the urgency of moving, and again, we couldn't have achieved that contract timescales without the huge support of our partner chain that have been completely bought into what we're trying to achieve as a prime contractor and a small company. And again, we couldn't have achieved it without the full buy-in from a knowledgeable client, especially those who are in the thick of it, shall we say. And so, this isn't a case of us going, hey, here's a data sheet. This is what we're trying to sell. Why don't you buy this? This is the clients coming to us and say, I have to be able to do this. We've tested this. This didn't work. This did work. And then working in partnership with the client, we've worked with their preference from certain sensors and certain manufacturers, and then filled the gaps, if you like, with what we're aware of and what we've been able to identify. And an example of the system that we just talked about, it was 12 different partners, manufacturers from 6 different countries, and you can understand the whole issue how that comes in and bringing that all together in the right timeframes with export licensing and project management, delivery timescales, especially during COVID, because we managed to pull off this project during the COVID pandemic.
Wow.
And moving people from country to country, and getting teams allowed to get through immigrations, travel. So we've had huge support from our own governments as well as the client government in being able to make these things happen. And I'm very pleased to say that we achieved a complete site acceptance. And it's one of several that we're working on at the moment. But just go back to what you were saying about the AI front. the crucial thing here is with these best of breed sensors, and let's call it the radars and the cameras and the RF detection systems are the key ones here. It's bringing that raw data from these multiple systems in real time, and we use the buzzword AI, but let's call it machine learning, let's call it smart algorithms, but we're adding a layer of AI onto that raw data that's coming in from the sensors to help the end user, the operator who's sat in front of the screen. We're trying to make those decisions ahead of time. We're trying to remove the false positives. We're trying to remove the false alarms. We're trying to remove the known data. So ultimately, what we come down to is anomaly detection.
Yeah.
And it's this ability to have very low false alarm rates, very good mitigation of the false positives that are going on out there. Because in some of these urban environments, it's a very noisy environment by default. Constant changing environmental conditions, which means you're constantly having to look at ways of adapting the sensors and how they're detecting. And then ultimately doing that classification and verification within the NIDAR command and control platform. And as I say, this didn't come around by accident. This was almost 10 years of 3 separate EU Framework 7 programs that Mars was the program leader on, that included NATO, ESA, 12 universities across Europe and various and the government bodies. And that core IP that was developed out of those research programs is what created the foundation of what NIDAR is today.
But it's good to see some of the Framework 7 programs turning into a capability that can be deployed out in the field and backed by business, because so many of them sit as research projects within universities.
It wasn't that long ago that Mars was held up at a recent event in Germany pre-COVID by Brussels as one of their leading examples of, hey, look at this. Part of that R&D programs actually made it into a product, and NIDAR is an evolution out of those platforms. And I hasten to say, much as we're talking about counter drone here, and we talk about AI, the other application of that technology, which again, has been quiet during COVID, but it's just coming to its fore again, is Mars has been a key partner with the cruise industry, building and developing the capability to create virtual fields around cruise shipping to detect man overboard events and aid in the rescue and recovery of man overboard. And when we look at what these man overboard systems essentially are, which is a small pod containing, a high frequency radar and a high frame rate thermal imaging camera with incredibly smart AI built in to detect, classify, and verify, potential threat with a very low false alarm rate. It's that core capability that was developed as part of that is also incumbent in NIDAR, that is being used to detect the drones. So part of that counter drone capability has evolved out of a life-saving technology that has been created for the cruise industry.
And so many applications for the same sorts of technology, possibly repackaged in slightly different ways, but
smart ways here.
Yeah, and very clever indeed. But so what is the counter UAS market looking like at the moment? Is there a possibility to try and identify sort of trends?
What we're seeing is an evolution to this layered, fully integrated approach. There was a lot of panic buying, shall we say, at the start of this. When the new threat was identified and the event started to occur. And let's be honest, there's a lot of snake oil out in the market.
Oh, yes.
But there are good, but there are good companies. We've got a great peer group of competitors that are creating amazing technologies in very quick timeframes. And it's about, we work together with some of these partners, I'll call them partners on some projects, and we compete on others. But the focus we've taken, as I say, is this large scale layered approach. And we're seeing more and more, I'll call them sovereign clients, becoming more aware of what they need and how the threat's emerging, and then realizing that they have to go all in, if you know what I mean. It's no longer of giving the guy at the gate, a little drone buster thing that he can point towards a drone. It has to be the full autonomous long range detection, classification, verification, and then having that layered approach where, you can start jamming at long range, you can look at the GPS jamming, you can look at spoofing, and then ultimately, if that doesn't work and the threat's been identified as a serious threat, you have to deploy some additional countermeasure capability to take out the threat.
Yeah, and it you can move in so many different dimensions. It's a very complex, multi-sensor, coherent change detection system operating live and linked to multiple countermeasures. Extremely complex indeed.
And of course, the support basically. I mean, just to give you some idea, we've grown. I'll put the Barstow pitch out here. Revenue-wise, we've grown almost 1,000% in the last 12 months on the scale of some of these projects, because they are that scale. But equally, we've also grown by about 400% in the number of people we employ. And we're in one area, we have a team of almost 30 people already in country deployed to support these programs. And these are people that we've brought in from ex-military, ex-software, ex-telecoms, because a large part of it is all about comms. But also, rapid growth in our AI teams. So it was we were already very software focused, but in order just to cope with this, sea change and unlike previous defense programs where you could have 2 to 3, 4 year life cycles, the life cycle on some of these is less than 12 months. And so, we have requests coming in from clients from customization that we have to turn around integration and custom software interfaces and things in less than 3 months, and the only way we can do that is having a very sizable software team. And so I'm pleased to say, during the COVID pandemic, we've gone from a team of just under 30 people to, by the end of this quarter, will be almost 100 people.
Fantastic.
On the split across the multiple locations, and a very high level of people. We recently brought into the team Stephen Scott from MBDA, who was head of future battlefield capability at MBDA, has joined Mars. We've recruited Andy Forbes from Airbus GPT has joined us, and there's a few other interesting names, shall we say, that have joined the team lately.
So in a nutshell, really, who is Mars, and what is Mars aiming to achieve?
That's the multi-million-dollar question. We create technology that protects assets and saves lives. Is one of the ways. And we're in this incredibly strong, fortunate position that we have a core piece of software that when we were doing the European Union programs, we never anticipated it would expand and grow into the capability that we're doing now. But I was having a chat with someone last week and said, within this small company, we're delivering sovereign contracts on large scale, totally integrated, layered counter-drone defense systems. At the same time, I'm also under contract delivering life-saving man overboard systems for some of the most influential cruise operators in the world. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, I'm also delivering situational awareness and protection systems to some of the largest mega yachts in the world. And these are all live contracts going there. So when you look at that broad spectrum, but fundamentally, the common factor that they all have inside is this, let's call it powered by NowDAR, this AI-driven command and control software that, whilst perhaps not being at the high end of the military tier 1 C4I type things, it does what the client's asking us to do. It's providing this autonomous capability to integrate all of these disparate sensors from different manufacturers into this common single tactical picture. And the user interface that the security officer on the mega yacht looks at is not that dissimilar from the man overboard life-saving system that they're looking at on the cruise ship to what the counter-drone operator is looking at in the command center. So as you get where I'm coming from, we have this common core of capability that can be customized to do different things.
And I was going to say that too many people think a lot of the tier 1 stuff is very, very good indeed, and a lot of the tier 1 supposed stuff is not as good as people make out, and the stuff that's available on a commercial from a commercial perspective is almost as good, if not, because it's got better reliability and everything else, better in some cases in providing that picture.
one of the reasons we just secured one of our most recent contracts is because the military advisors to this government department couldn't get their head around when we were doing the live demos that they were, we had to convince them that it wasn't recorded data and that we were able to provide real-time video overlay onto the single tactical picture from multiple sources on the same video wall.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we haven't seen this before. And I wasn't aware, when you look at some of the major projects that are going along on the Mexican border, for example, with the border surveillance. As far as I'm aware, some of these type of projects, they still don't have real-time video monitoring coming live from the sensor towers. And this is something that we were doing as part of the EU program, was creating the software that could allow that real-time multiple source video overlay on the SIG, because that was the only way we could create the field around the cruise ship from multiple cameras.
Well, there's almost another complete discussion. I'm got very frustrated in Iraq in 2005, 2006, whenever I didn't have technology that I knew existed in Northern Ireland in the 1980s to bring a single intelligence picture together, and it would have been so useful in Iraq and would have saved so many lives if it had that capability. And I could never understand.
And this is the next step. This is where we're going to see the next step evolving. And that, one of the things that has made some of these sovereign clients, and partly driven by COVID, is this need to invest in, let's call it, joint operation capability, where we bring in these different ministries and these different stakeholders together, so that when you're sat in a command room, I'm not just looking at radar imagery and camera imagery. I'm looking at real-time intelligence. I'm looking at, I'm analyzing, interpretation of social media feed. I'm looking at supply chains. I'm looking at the food chain, the power chain, how many beds I've got somewhere, ultimately, I think what we're going to end up with, and where we see the evolution going, is that the same technology and the same software and the same AI that we're creating to do counter-drone applies equally to UGV, applies to USV, applies to UUV, applies to third-party state actors walking along the street, applies to anomalous behavior running along a border or around a perimeter. And when you think it's feasible to start integrating all of that capability into this, let's call it single tactical picture, this joint operational awareness.
So is that where you see the technology developing in the future?
It's where Mars is putting a lot of its investment now. I'm pleased to say that, again, some of the successful projects we've delivered, those same clients are now coming back to us and saying, hey, we loved what you're doing for this. Can we input this into the system as well, or can we do this and can we do that? So this whole evolution into smart cities, I think, is some of the next step forward. Integrating even more sensors into that single tactical feed, where I can see the day coming very soon where we will have hundreds of inputs all coming into these servers.
Well, and why not? The technical capabilities there today. It's just getting around the complexities of the communications, the size of the pipes that you need to put the data down, the ability to process the data, and then the difficult one is the handling of the sensitive data in a way that you meet all the international data processing regulations and GDPR and everything else. And that in itself must be a huge challenge.
And again, it's part of, I think, the challenge we feed, and you're probably even more aware than I am about, we mention, we can call it a buzzword or a dirty word in some contexts, AI. Some people are embracing it for the benefits it can bring. Other people are afraid of it because of the downside of surveillance regulations. And I think it's going to be an interesting evolution how we go through about what's good AI and what's bad AI.
It's fascinating, and in so many different ways we see this. In the simplest one of the simplest ways, there's the criticism of the automatic facial recognition cameras that the police have had in the UK because it's profiled people. It's profiled people because the AI algorithms were built on data sets that didn't represent the communities that the system was being deployed in, and therefore it was built on false status X, you're going to get increased number of false alarms that are coming through, and that's where getting into your data and understanding everything behind it is so critical, and means that an extra level of complexity onto what you're producing is there, and that complexity is growing and growing and growing and growing.
And a good example is, when we talk about evolution, I mentioned smart city as being an evolution. For many years, I've been deeply involved, and Mars is still very proactive in the maritime surveillance market. And I mentioned about some of the systems we're delivering don't just do the counter drone; they're doing the surface asymmetric threat detection. If we just even look at SpaceX, and I don't mean to name drop, but if you told me 5 years ago that I could put a low orbit synthetic aperture radar satellite into space for less than $1 million, or around about $1 million, you would have been laughed at. But
Yeah, exactly.
but that's the reality now. And the people are putting up these low Earth, broadband satellites, if you like. But at the same time, we can also, at the same time as he's putting up 60 broadband satellites, we've got partners that are putting up 3 to 4 satellites per launch, creating a new constellation of SAR imagery. And when I go back to the European Union programs that we talked about, these, the Sectronic, Navtronic, and ProRec projects, part of that was working with ESA to do the analysis of SAR imagery to detect potential pirate attacks off Somalia on the skiffs. In just a few years, we've now got affordable satellites with affordable data, shall we say, that can give me imagery every few hours down to 25 centimeter resolution across almost anywhere on the globe. And if I integrate that with coastal radar networks, I integrate it with the radar networks on my Coast Guard vessels, for example, then bringing these three sources together, I now have the ability to create an incredible picture, if you like, for the in a national headquarters of what's going on in my EEZ. And 5 years ago we couldn't do that, but now we can.
Well, and it's not that many years ago that if I talked about 25 centimeter imagery capability, I'd have had to spread you because of the level of classification.
Outside of the Five Eyes, it didn't exist, and again, the cost base would have been through the roof. It scares me.
Oh, it is scary. What can be seen out there, and this is where I smile whenever you see some of the big picture stuff going on around the world, and countries denying that they know what's happening. No, we've got a good view, but again, that's a completely different subject matter. So what's next for Mars? And how do people find out more about what you can provide and Mars's capability?
And again, I'll do the elevator pitch. We've updated the website recently with some new imagery and some new information on some of the projects we're working on. They can get in touch with us through the website, obviously at the info@mars.com. We've been building up. I'm pleased to say we went, and again, it's an indication of how quick the company's growing. I think we went from 1,000 followers to 2,500 followers on LinkedIn in just less than 9 months. So that's a good example of how quick that growth's occurring. And what's next I see is more sovereign clients, if you like, becoming aware of the successful layered approach that some of our client base is taking. And looking at that, and I'm pleased to say we're looking at about 4 or 5 other sovereign clients that are at different stages of looking at what we can provide. And I think we're going to expand our partnership base. We already work very closely with many of the tier ones, many of the tier twos, but also putting a huge amount of investment into startups as well. We're recognizing, okay, I don't have the same pot of money that perhaps a tier one has, but we are putting together some early stage seed corn funding, for want of a better word, into university programs, which is where we started. Let's face it. So we're going back to our roots of how we got off the ground, and we're now putting some of that investment back into academia, to take risk on future evolution of non-kinetic type countermeasures, to engage, and be aware of the ever evolving threat from the airborne threat as well as the maritime threat. And also working hard because we don't have the benefit of time to create things from scratch new. And so in the case of many of the platforms that we use now, whether it's the radar, the camera, some of the countermeasures, they weren't designed to be counter-drone countermeasure or sensors, but we've been able to quickly modify them to adapt, to this new threat.
And that's, I think, one of the strengths that you've got not being one of these tier one companies, because you've got the ability to be agile very quickly in such a rapidly changing market. And that's a real strength where you can add value to them rather than them adding value to you. Rob, I'll make sure that there's a link to the website in the blurb underneath this podcast. But it's been a real pleasure talking to you on Chatting with Ingram today.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Please feel free to share if you like what you've heard, and I look forward to being with you next time.